Alright guys, so when we left off we were talking about the First Continental Congress, and now we're going to pick up with the actual fighting that had started to go on between the British and the American colonists. Okay, within the American colonies there was a group of patriots, and remember, patriots are people who want to declare their independence from the British. Loyalists are people who want to remain loyal to the British. Okay, and there was a group of patriots that formed a militia in the colonies, and a militia is like a civilian army. Okay, the militia was people who said that they were going to fight against the British or fight against any threat, but they're not part of the regular army. All right, that militia was called the Minutemen. They chose this name because they were ready to fight at a moment's notice. They were formed in 1774 in Concord, Massachusetts. And these are going to be the guys that start the fight against the British. Okay, like we just said, loyalists, who were made up of a political party called Tories, remained loyal to the British, and patriots, who were usually made up of a political party called Whigs, opposed the British and wanted to fight for independence. Following all of the excitement with the Boston Tea Party and the coercive acts and all that jazz, the British were really looking to crack down on the colonies and keep them from arming the Minutemen. They saw the Minutemen as a threat. They didn't want the Minutemen to get out of control. And so when they saw that the Minutemen had been building up supplies, military supplies, they decided it was time to seize those supplies. And so on April 18th, 1775, the British General Thomas Gage sent troops to seize or take the militia's supply depot at Concord in Massachusetts. Now, you've all heard this story of Paul Revere and the Midnight Ride, right? And the way it was supposed to work was Paul Revere and other Patriot riders were going to get signals from Patriots from the Old North Church. There was going to be one lantern if by land and two if by sea. And so when Thomas Gage decides to seize the supply depot at Concord, William Dawes, Paul Revere, and Samuel Prescott are all going to be Patriot riders that go to warn Lexington and Concord that the British are coming. All right, so William Dawes, Paul Revere go to Lexington to warn them. Both of them are detained, but not arrested. Paul Revere was kept a little bit longer than Dawes or Prescott. Prescott actually makes it all the way to Concord to warn that the British are coming. Okay, so now that we know that the British are on their way to seize the Minutemen's supply depot, tons of farmers and patriots and just everyday people with guns come out to stop these British soldiers from taking the supplies. When they get to Lexington, there were 70 Minutemen, but there were over 700 British soldiers. Okay, now there's some contention about who fired first. A lot of people say it was the British. A lot of people say it was the colonists. Long story short, it doesn't really matter. There was a firefight between these 70 Minutemen and the 700 British soldiers. Now, being outnumbered 10-1, it's not going to be good for the Minutemen here. 8 were killed, 10 were wounded, the rest ran away. All right, and the British marched on through. However, when word got to Concord that the British were coming, and word got to Concord that there had been a skirmish at Lexington, when the British get to Lexington, there will be, when the British get to Concord, there will be 400 Minutemen there. And they are actually going to force the British to retreat. This was a big deal. This was, as we said on the previous slide, the shot heard round the world, because this was this marked the beginning of the fighting, the actual fighting between the British and the American colonies. I've got this back of a dollar bill on here for a reason, but I'll come back to that in just a second. All right, so we're going to then, after the battles of Lexington and Concord, we're going to have a second Continental Congress. Okay, this Second Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia in 1775 to establish the Continental Army. This is an army that will represent the 13 colonies. Now, they're not establishing this Continental Army with the direct purpose of declaring independence from the British. They're establishing this Continental Army as a matter of defense. Because now that the Minutemen have started fighting against the British, the colonies are concerned about a British retaliation. And so they think that they need to create an army just for their protection and the prevention of their destruction. They appoint George Washington, the hero of the French and Indian War, as the head of this Continental Army. All right. Now we're going to go back to that dollar bill in just a second, because they also sent a document called the Olive Branch Petition to King George III. Well, when we look at the Great Seal of the United States here, we look at this eagle on the back of the Great Seal. There's a lot of symbology packed into this little Great Seal. At the top here, we have stars. I don't know if you've ever counted them, but there's 13 of them, okay? 13 5-pointed stars. And together, they make a 6-pointed star. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a triangle here, triangle here. That makes a 6-pointed star, and that 6-pointed star is made up of 5-pointed stars, okay? What's the symbol? What is the symbolism there? The symbolism is we're united. Right? We've got these 13 states, which are themselves independent stars, but together they make one big star, right? Down here we have a Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. So out of many colonies, we create one nation, right? And then we have two very distinct things here in the eagle's talons. We have arrows on one side, and we have, oh, what's this? This is an olive branch in the other side. All right, so this is obviously a symbol of war. This is obviously a symbol of peace. Now, I'm just showing you that Great Seal so that you understand that the olive branch is a symbol of peace. All right, so going back to the Olive Branch Petition, the colonies are like, look, there's fighting going on in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts militia has fought against the British at Lexington and Concord. We don't want a war with the British. But at the very same time that they're sending the Olive Branch Petition to the king, radicals in that Second Continental Congress have ordered an attack on British troops in Quebec. So if you're the king, if you're King George III, on the one hand, you're getting this Olive Branch Petition asking for peace. On the other hand, you hear that the Americans have attacked British soldiers in Quebec. What's he supposed to think, right? He pretty much disregards the Olive Branch Petition, and he considers the colonists to be open and avowed enemies of Great Britain, okay? Things are looking bleak for peace. Then we have the Battle of Bunker Hill. The Battle of Bunker Hill actually takes place on a hill called Breed's Hill. Bunker Hill was the site of some of the fighting, but was for most of the battle, Bunker Hill was where the Patriots, the colonists, were housing their reinforcements, and then they would push reinforcements up to Breed's Hill, where the majority of the fighting took place. On Breed's Hill, William Prescott commanded the Minutemen, the militia, the Massachusetts militia. And the famous quote that's usually attributed to him, though there is some doubt as to whether or not he was the one that actually said this, his famous quote is, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." All right, so if you think about a battlefield, you can see, 100 yards away from you, you can see people, but you can't see the whites of their eyes from 100 yards away. And he wanted his soldiers to wait until the British were very close before they fired their weapons. A couple reasons for that. One, weapons in the 1700s are going to be wildly inaccurate. Okay, this is before we have rifles. What we have in the 1700s are smoothbore muskets. All right, for those of you that don't know anything about guns, rifles have spiral grooves on the inside of their barrels. Okay, smoothbore muskets don't. So if you guys can see this, I don't know if you can or not. Maybe I can make this picture a little bit bigger. Okay. Yeah, you get the idea. On the inside of a modern rifle, you see how there are spiral grooves on the inside of these barrels? All right, these spiral grooves are made so that a bullet spins when it comes out of the rifle, and that makes it much more accurate. Guns in the 1700s would not have had this rifling. Guns in the 1700s would have been very smooth on the inside. It was just a smooth cylinder. No grooves, no spirals, just a smooth cylinder, and it fired a round ball out the end of the barrel. And what that means is you would have had really inaccurate weapons. So Prescott doesn't want his men firing when the British are real far away because they're going to miss because they have inaccurate weapons. And they have a limited amount of ammunition. So if they're wasting their ammunition firing at the British while they're too far away, they're going to lose. So they wait until the British get close. The battlefield was very treacherous for the British because the Americans had the high ground. They were the ones that occupied the hills. They were the ones that occupied these highlands, and the British are trying to push them off these hills. So as they advance, and the hills, it was the middle of summer. The British have wool coats on. They had way too much gear for this battle. And the hay that was on the hills was like waist deep, hiding the terrain underneath. So the British, they had a hard time getting up these hills. There were zigzagged fences on these hills that the colonists used to their advantage because they could rest their muskets on those fences and make them much more accurate. 2 British advances were turned back. Some of the British even retreated all the way back to their boats. But a 3rd British advance actually pushed the Americans off the hills because they retreated due to a lack of ammunition. Most of the American casualties occurred during their retreat. So if they were pushed off of Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill, why do we celebrate this battle and why do we talk about this battle? Well, the fact that we turned back 2 British advances boosted American confidence. The fact that we retreated only due to a lack of ammunition boosted American confidence. And the British troops that were there were eventually trapped in Boston because they were surrounded by colonial militia. All right, so this is what's going on while we have the Second Continental Congress meeting, right? In December of 1775, the king shut down trade with the colonies and began recruiting mercenaries from Germany called Hessians that they were going to pay to come over here and fight Americans. This was a signal to the Americans that it was time to declare their independence. But we had to convince common people to support this American Declaration of Independence. So people like Thomas Paine persuaded the public through their publications like Common Sense why it was time to declare our independence from the British. Not so much that it was just British taxes, but because it was British taxes. The British ignoring our rights to self-governance, British ignoring our rights to representation in Parliament, British using force against the colonies. All of these things combined to cause the Americans to declare independence. And that declaration was approved on July 4th, 1776. You'd be amazed how many of my students don't know why we celebrate July 4th or why we shoot off fireworks on July 4th. Well, that's because that's when we declared our independence. We approved the Declaration, which had been written by Thomas Jefferson, thus beginning the American Revolution. All right. We'll pick up with the fighting of the Revolution probably next week. And I hope you guys are having a great homecoming week, even those of you that are at home. And we'll talk to you guys real soon.